thank you, Sayon Camara. Let's hear it for Sayon Camara. He's called us all here today for this very, very exciting and important event. So welcome, and thank you so much, every one of you for coming. I want everyone to know that we are recording this event. BCTV will be running it. It will also play on YouTube and other venues. So if you don't want to be on camera, just be aware that we are recording and you will be on camera potentially. So be aware. I'd like everybody to turn off their cell phones if they can, so that you don't interrupt the video recording. I'll give you a moment to do that. My name is Lissa Weinman. I'm one of the co-founders of the Brattleboro Words Project, which was a National Endowment for the Humanities sponsored project with a lot of other local support that really brought this all into being starting in 2017, when almost to the day, 4 years ago, we did our first exhibit on Lucy Terry Prince in a mobile unit on Main Street as part of the Brattleboro Literary Festival, and it was called Lucy Speaks, because it's Lucy's speech and her poetry that brings us all together here today, and also the Prince family to celebrate this historic marker. It's been a long road, and it's just so great to be here right now, 4 years later, and see this official commemoration of their contribution to the beautiful Vermont that we all know and love today. So I want to say a few thank yous. I want to recognize Vermont Representative Sarah Coffey, who represents Guilford, is here with us today. I want to thank Sayon Camara for calling us all in for this special celebration. And I want to just recognize all of the people that have been, particularly Shanta Lee Gander, who's been leading this effort with Lucy Terry Prince, and the work of Gretchen, Gerzina, they're all here with us today, as well as Curtis Reed. Without the three of them, none of this would be happening. So you'll hear from them very soon. I want to encourage everybody to sign up on our information table here and look at all the great work in our portfolio about the Brattleboro Words Trail. We're audio stories about all of the people that have contributed to the literary history and the history of thought leadership and progressive leadership in Vermont over time, and it continues today. And we are still collecting audio and creating audio. It's a living project that will continue to grow. There's an app and a website. You can listen to over 100 stories right now of very, very interesting characters that have all led to the creation of the very special Vermont and Brattleboro area, specifically identity. So take one of the copies of the proclamations we have here in the basket, the state passed a resolution honoring Lucy Terry Prince and Abijah Prince. So please take one of the proclamations if you're interested. They're here for you to keep and treasure. Now it's my great pleasure to just want to also thank Catalyst Communication, Maya and Damien. Thank you so much. Maisie Starrett, an intern on our project, always helping, and everybody else, you know who you are from the Brattleboro Words Trail, who's led to this wonderful day. Now it's my pleasure to introduce the MC for today's event. Veranda Porch is Vice Chair of the Guilford Select Board, and she's also the area's bard, our beloved poet. So without further, and there's a story about Veranda and the founding of Packers Corners on the Brattleboro Words Trail that you can listen to. It's quite entertaining, as everything always is with Veranda. So thank you so much, everybody, and I'm going to turn it now over to Veranda Porch. Thank you.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, we've got wind here. First, a land acknowledgement. I want to acknowledge in gratitude and humility this ancient land where I came as a young stranger half a century ago. Vermont. I came into life a long time before that. This land, bearing life for hundreds of millions of years, dinosaurs, ferns, fungus. 3 massive glaciers scoured the landscape. Erratic boulders heaved from chunks of ice calving off the margins. The lake, called Hitchcock, was created from their meltwater, and 10,000 years ago, people came to live on the shores of the freshwater lake, following large game, caribou, and mastodon. Ancestors of the Abenaki people of the dawn named all they found and shaped their lives together. Over each era, descendants adapted to a radically changing climate and landscape, hunting, gathering, trading, and later farming. Traditional knowledge passed down by voice and action and connections with the spirit world flourished. I want to acknowledge the lethal legacy of colonial oppression, turmoil, and harm, from the usurpation of communal space to the false science of eugenics. Abenaki teachers and allies exhumed the truth and worked to resist the folding and faulting of this history. I turn in gratitude to my mentors. Walking across the land with you is an awakening. Friends, I greet you in the seasonable chill following October's second summer. It is my pleasure as Guilford Select Board Vice Chair to join you in honoring Lucy Terry Prince and Abijah Prince. Here at the Welcome Center, strangers passing through, pausing to walk the dog, will come upon this marker that scratches the surface of an extraordinary history and the Prince's challenging legacy for us. It is noteworthy that the Governor's Council charged Guilford selectmen, that's what they called them in those days, selectmen, with protecting Abijah and Lucy Prince from their toxic neighbors. As a select board today, underscoring fiscal oversight, care of roads and bridges, dog cases, our responsibility encompasses goals. What kind of town do we aspire to be in terms of diversity, equity, and inclusivity? How does the story of Lucy, Abijah, and their neighbors play out here today? My connection to the Princes is more personal. As a poet, retrieving and sharing unheard voices is essential to me. Retrieve, from the same etymological root as troubadour and treasure trove, the French word trouver, to find. When we arrived at Guilford in 1968 as a communard, the first book I read was the fat green volume of the official Guilford history, compiled by members of the Broadbrook Range in 1961. Our 18th-century neighbors welcomed me, Mother Honeywell the witch, Abijah, and especially Lucy, poet, warrior, and orator. Years later, as a poet in the schools, I told the story of Lucy, Abijah, including his ghost and the rearing horse in the mist, to Guilford School kindergartners at the Girls Cemetery on the Packer Corners Road. While the kids explored the stones, I slipped out of the woods dressed as Mother Honeywell, witch and herbalist, and I told them the story of Abijah and Lucy and the noises and the ghost, which with each episode of the telling, kids cheered, gasped, and sighed. Guilford 5-year-olds knew what is fair and unfair, and with them rose the legacy of Abijah and Lucy. So as MC, that ends my personal remarks, and now I just wanted to introduce our speakers today. Laura Trishman with the State Historical Preservation Officer. She'll be speaking about the making of the historic marker. Gretchen Holbrook Gerzina, probably familiar to many of you, former Guilford resident who wrote the Pulitzer Prize nominated book, Mr. and Mrs. Prince, How an Extraordinary 18th-Century Family Moved Out of Slavery and Into Legend. An alumna of Marlborough College, she's been a tenured full professor at Vassar College, Barnard College, Columbia University, Dartmouth College, and currently chairs the biography program at the University of Massachusetts in Amherst. Shanta Lee Gander, multidisciplinary award-winning artist and author who is the gubernatorial appointee to the Vermont Humanities Council and whose work includes her lectures on the life of Lucy Terry Prince on both the Vermont and New Hampshire Speakers Bureau, and is a brilliant poet. You've got to read her work. And Curtis Reed, Executive Director of Vermont Partnership for Fairness and Diversity, founder of the Vermont African American Heritage Trail, of which the Prince Memorial will eventually be the first stop at this gateway to Vermont. So enjoy the program. Thank you.
Good morning and welcome. I'm Laura Trishman, the Vermont State Historic Preservation Officer. It is my honor to be a part of this Roadside Historic Site Marker Dedication Ceremony on behalf of the state of Vermont. Events such as this are special because we get to highlight important people and stories that are significant to Vermont's history, but are also need to be recognized as part of our nation's heritage. The Roadside Historic Site Marker Program has been a tool for teaching stories since 1947, when it was established by the Vermont legislature. It is one of the state's smallest programs and has one of the farthest reaches, with nearly 300 markers in production or placed throughout Vermont. And actually, there's one historic site marker gracing a roadside in Middletown, Virginia, to honor Vermonters' efforts at the Battle of Cedar Creek during the Civil War. 55 markers were installed during the initial 2 years of the program. The first to recognize African American struggles was placed in 1949 at Rugby, highlighting Simon and Jesse's flight for freedom and the Robinson family's part in the Underground Railroad. The second, installed that same year, was in Danville, honoring the national efforts of Vermont-born Congressman Thaddeus Stevens, who fiercely opposed slavery and discrimination, authoring the 14th Amendment and inspiring the 15th Amendment. Now, in the 74th year of the program, we have 26 markers observing African American history in Vermont, with many more applications rightly now being processed and researched. And there are also many more stories that need to be told through this program. These markers recognize strong individuals like Lucy Terry Prince, author Jeffrey Brace, college president Martin Henry Freeman, college graduates Andrew Harris and George Washington Henderson. Just placed a few weeks ago was a marker for Sheriff Stephen Bates in Virgins. We're processing a marker for former slave Dinah, who fought for financial support from the town of Windsor. We're also in the production for a marker for Cleta Pate, who provided a boarding house in Burlington that was advertised in the travel guidebooks for Black Americans. These 3-foot signs of cast aluminum, crammed with 765 characters, that includes periods, commas, spaces, on each side, provide a glimpse into the lives of noteworthy and inspiring Black Americans, the places where their history happened, recognizing their struggles and triumphs, and fight for freedom and equality. It is only fitting that Abijah and Lucy Terry Prince be recognized and honored with this roadside historic site marker, the 283rd to be installed and dedicated. Special thank yous must be given to the Brattleboro Words Project for submitting the marker application, and for all of those, especially Gretchen, who helped with the tedious wordsmithing. Try to put some history onto 765 characters. It's a challenge. I also want to thank the staff of the Division for Historic Preservation, which operates the program, members of the Vermont Advisory Council on Historic Preservation, which is the governing board that approves all the markers, the Vermont Legislature, which supports this program financially, V-Trans for the installation of a 175-pound marker set on a 12-foot pole, and most especially, all those who helped get the approval to have the marker here at the Guilford Welcome Center, which is the most visited welcome center in our brave little state. It is my honor, on behalf of the state of Vermont and Governor Phil Scott, to present the Atcha and Lucy Terry Prince Roadside Historic Site Marker to Guilford. Congratulations.
I can't tell you how happy I am to be here today to talk about two people who changed my life. And I'm so pleased that all of you have come to honor these wonderful people. I started coming to this area when I was 13 years old. I got a scholarship to the Putney School's summer camp, and my roommate was a member of the Judd family. And ever since I was 13, I spent part of every summer at Marlboro with them. When I decided to go to college, I made a terrible mistake and realized I needed to come back here. So I went to Marlboro. Tom was president then. And so I have had a continuous relationship with this area. I was the only Black student at Marlboro when I arrived. And I remember thinking that I was the only Black person in the state of Vermont. When I decided to come back, it was all accidental, like so much in this book. The discoveries, the people, the ways that we were able to find out things. So much was an accident. I was visiting a friend who said there's some land in Guilford. I bought it, built a house, and my mother promptly said, you know, there was another Black person living there before you, a couple of 100 years ago. And then I realized it was Abijah, and that Lucy, of course, I'd heard of, but I didn't know she was in this area. Nor did I know that I could see over the hill outside my house was their property. And I felt this is something I was called back to do. I did not expect to do it. And for over nearly 20 years now, I have thrown myself fully into their lives, so much so that I often get ourselves confused because I spent so much time with them. For those of you who don't know, Abijah and Lucy were some of the very first landowners and settlers in the state of Vermont. There are so many legends about them. It took many years to just untangle it. I still hear them sometimes, and I'm just appalled after I spent all my life sort of trying to sort them out. But they were enslaved people. She was from Africa. She came over when she was probably about 5 or 6. She was taken to central Massachusetts for several years, later ended up in Deerfield. Abijah was born around 1706. He lived in Wallingford, Connecticut. He's roughly contemporary with Benjamin Franklin, just to give you a sense of history. His owner brought him up to Northfield, Massachusetts, when he was still enslaved, when he was about 12 years old. And he lived there as an enslaved person till he was nearly 56 years old, in the back of Beyond. It was not a big place, Northfield. He finally engineered his own freedom, although there are people out there who claim their family's freedom. They did not. He was a very strong, important man. He married Lucy when she was about 25 or 26, still living in Deerfield, and she got her freedom shortly after that. They lived in Deerfield for a number of years, and then he got the opportunity to help clear some land, 100 acres, in southern Vermont, in Guilford. He worked his way through it, got the land, and they built a home. Their children at that point were mostly grown and gone, but some of the younger ones came up with them. Abijah and Lucy did not have an easy time. They were assaulted. People tried to run them off their property. Their neighbors across the road tried to instigate people to drive them away. And Abijah took them to court, one by one, over and over. We could not find these records, and then when you find them, you're astonished. In the courthouse at Newfane were just moldy boxes stacked up, and my husband was able to find these records. Anybody owed him $1 and didn't pay him, he took them to court in Guilford. He taught Lucy how to speak in public and to listen to him. He brought his sons to the court sessions so that they could see how to protect their own rights. And he stayed there until he died at the age of 88. When I decided to write this book, I thought, oh, this is great. I live in Guilford. I'll just go do all the research in the Historical Society, and it'll be wonderful. And I got a one-year wonderful grant to do that, and I found that they had one file folder, and that was the extent of it. So it turned out to be this long, arduous, exciting, wonderful journey. 2 years in, my husband joined me, and just very quickly, my mother, who had first told me about Abijah, was a genealogist. So I went to look up her records, and that was when I discovered that I was actually descended from the family that had owned Abijah Prince. So every step of the way, there was something that drew me to them and made me have to write their story. So this is a wonderful story. I am so pleased that all of you have done this. I particularly want to thank Shanta, who has thrown herself into getting a day like this done, the proclamation from the state of Vermont, and the enduring, and I hope forever enduring, legacy of Abijah and Lucy Perry Prince. Thank you.
Thank you, Gretchen. Actually, without your work, none of this would be possible, especially with the mistruths flying around. Given the moment of a most complicated now, joy is becoming a rare commodity. But for this moment, we can stand in joy, in full celebration and recognition of Abijah and Lucy and all of the ways that they challenge the myth of lost, forgotten, never to be found. Because of the princes, the concept of legacy becomes something that I no longer have to imagine, but see. As Lucy and Abijah pierce time's veil, vanishing the road from there to here, giving a sense of permission that shouldn't have to be granted, permission to take space. In this way, today reminds me that history isn't just televised. History will be spoken, witnessed, named, and marked in ways that marks the road, telling everyone, especially those entering the whitest state in the Union with brown skin, that they too can be here now, not in struggle, not in fighting, just be, without apology, to do their lives in the Green Mountain States. Given the nature of this event, it is most fitting that the first known African-American poet in the United States, Lucy Terry Prince, have the last words. August 25th, 1746.
The Indians did an ambush lay, some very valiant men to slay, the names of whom I'll not leave out. Samuel Allen like a hero fought, and though he was so brave and bold, his face no more shall we behold. Elijah Hawk was killed outright, and though he had a chance to fight, before he did the Indian see was shot and killed immediately. Oliver Amson, he was slain, which caused his friends much grief and pain. Simeon Anson they found dead, not many rods distant from his head. Adonijah delay we do hear, did lose his life, which was so dear. John Sadler fled by water and thus escaped the dreadful slaughter. Eunice Allen saw the Indians coming and thought she could escape by running. Had not her petticoat stopped her, those awful creatures would not have caught her, nor tommyhawked her on the head, leaving her on the ground for dead. And young Samuel Allen, oh lackaday, he was taken and carried to Canada. Thank you.
Indulge me for a moment. When I ask how are you doing, I'd like for you to turn to your neighbor and in your most exuberant self, say, I'm looking good and feeling good. So, how are you doing today? Right. Yeah. So whenever we would ask our Father, how are you doing today? He would always respond with, I'm looking good and feeling good. And that's because he knew that an encounter that began with a smile on your face held a promise of possibility. So I want to thank you for indulging me in the memory of my father, who died in 2019, just a few days short of his 91st birthday. And I want to thank Sayon for calling his spirit and all the spirit of all of our ancestors gathered here today. I can say that without question, this is the largest group to attend the unveiling of his state historic marker on the African American Heritage Trail. 2 weeks ago, I was in Vergennes for the unveiling of the Stephen Bates historic marker, and I can tell you that they didn't have as many video cameras or as many still cameras in the audience. So you've done a great job, Lissa and Shanta, in getting the word out. The Vermont African American Heritage Trail was launched by Vermont Partnership and the Department of Tourism on January 15th, 2013. It's hard to believe that we're coming up on our 9th anniversary. We created the trail for two really important purposes. First is to attract cultural tourists to the state of Vermont. There's a market in Black and brown communities. They have a thirst for learning about history all over the country. And we needed something to attract Black and brown tourists into the state of Vermont. And the trail is rapidly and more importantly becoming a part of the mix of why we see more African Americans visiting the state of Vermont. The second, and has to do with teaching Vermont children about the history of the state of Vermont. And that history is intertwined with stories from the Abenaki, stories of persons of African descent. It's really important for Vermont children to understand that we have a shared history together. For those who would want to limit what our children learn in schools, are existential threats to our economy. Because in order for us to attract folks here, there need to be people who are already here who have an understanding of the history, an understanding of our relationship to other cultures. So, if you haven't seen, this is our new brochure for the African American Heritage Trail. In 2023, when we update this, or we liquidate the 75,000 copies that we currently have, both the Stephen Bates and Lucy Terry prints and Abijah prints will appear in that. So we have some brochures at the table, and it opens up into a map that is all the sites. So I want to thank you for indulging me, and I wish you all the best, and tell all your friends and family to come visit Vermont. All right, thank you.
So this ends the formal remarks of our program. The historic marker, if you haven't seen it yet, is over yonder, and I hope that you will join us in taking pleasure in it and also providing photo opportunities for people who want to document this day. So thanks again for being here and celebrating Abijah and Lucy and all the people who love them. Bye-bye.
Oh, hi, I'm Sarah Coffey. I'm the Vermont State Representative for Guilford and Vernon, and this is a super exciting day. This historic marker and this history are so critical to our state. These markers tell the story that's often less known, and the significance of Lucy Terry prints and Abijah prints is one that all of us should know. And when I first moved to Guilford, somebody told me about the book Mr. and Mrs. Prince that Gretchen Gerzina had done. And it's for those who don't know the work, it's a beautiful, personal, and rich history of these two remarkable people who managed to get their freedom and made Vermont their home under some pretty challenging circumstances. But their story is a story of resilience, and really it's so important and fantastic that here at the State Welcome Center in Guilford that we are able to share that history with Vermonters and folks who come to visit our state.
My name is William Edelglass. Together with Lissa, we wrote the grant for the Brattleboro Words Project. I used to teach at Marlborough College.
Yeah, we, along with a whole other group of institutions, including the Brattleboro Historical Society, Brooks Memorial Library, Right Action, Marlborough College, and the Brattleboro Literary Festival, all got together and decided to create an audio tour of the Brattleboro area. And so now we have over 85 sites and over 100 audio segments, and we're so pleased to be here today honoring the story that we told about Lucy Terry Prince and Abijah Prince, early African American landowners in Guilford, Vermont.
It is a real pleasure to see everybody out here today. One of the great things about this project is there have been many hundreds of community members involved, making audio, telling stories, sharing those stories. And now with this day, we're able to share this story of Lucy Prince with all the folks who are coming to Vermont to visit. We're really thrilled about that.